I feel like the online coaching industry has in some way lost its value on this. We have spent years teaching each other how to say no, how to protect our energy, how to keep our expertise, make every relationship transactional. And we wonder why so many of us feel hollow at the end of a profitable year, or maybe not even a profitable year.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. We are represented.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. So, in my last episode, episode 107, I alluded to a conversation that took place inside my membership. I asked one of our members a deep question. It kind of came up as she was sharing, and I thought of it, and I was like, I have to ask this question. She's white, she runs a really successful business, and she's busy, like proper busy, the kind of busy that makes you wonder how someone fits anything else into their week. But she has always made time for this work, and she has been consistent with her inclusion work. And so I asked her, does inclusion ever feel like an inconvenience to you, given the amount of work that you have going on? And her answer was a firm no. But she did say immersing herself in this work, though not an inconvenience to her, it is tiring sometimes. She spoke about doing the work practically, and one of the practices she's embraced is conversations around the dinner table, as well as reading from culturally diverse authors and the racial stamina that is building in her. And so, if you've been following me for some time now, you know about how much I talk about building that muscle, your racial stamina. And a lot of it stems from conversations, particularly conversations with people that you trust, that you love, and using that dinner table as a place where you can have some of these conversations, and how powerful that dinner table can then become. And so that side of work makes her feel like she's got a good grasp on things. She feels like she's a good person, like she's being a good ally. Then actual life happens, and one begins to realize the lived experience is very different from what you've actually read and how you're kind of positioning yourself. And that is the gap that I want to speak to today. The gap between intellectual understanding and lived experience that is really close to home. Because the online coaching industry, I have observed that very few are aware of this gap, and even fewer are trying to close it. You may have heard of Ruby Hamad. She's an Australian journalist. I don't know if she still is a journalist, but when she wrote the book, White Tears, Brown Scars, she was. And when I read it many, many years ago, it would be maybe 7 years ago, I felt like that was such a precise piece of writing on race relations in this country of Australia. One of the things she mentions in the book is the gap between how white women see themselves and how they actually move through the world. She writes about the protective layer of seeing yourself as one of the good ones, as being progressive, as an ally. The protective layer is actually comfortable, but it is also dangerous because if you already believe yourself to be a good person, guess what happens? You stop looking, you stop checking, and you stop letting reality update your self image. Her argument lands directly on what the member in my program was addressing. Reading the book makes you feel informed, but information is not lived experience. Self image as a good person is not the work. So, why do so many of us stay in the intellectual layer? Why do we collect the books and the podcasts? Hello, listener, and the inclusion statements, but flinch when the work gets inconvenient and real? I have a bit of a theory about this. It came to me through another member in our group who picked up my question after I asked it. She said, Annie, in Western culture, we have turned inconvenience into a dirty word. Now, let me repeat that because I feel like it bears repeating and I don't want you hitting rewind. She said, we have turned inconvenience into a dirty word. Now, if you have been online for any length of time in the coaching and online business space, you have seen this play out. We have built a whole industry around protecting our peace. Boundaries that started as healthy practice have been now weaponized into refusing to help anyone who has not paid us. The booking link reflex. Someone asks you a sincere question about your area of expertise, and your default response is, here's a link to a paid call. We have made hospitality, being hospitable to others, we've made it into a transaction. We've made generosity into a leak. And we've made being available to other people into a problem to be solved. And we've done this while telling ourselves we're inclusive. Now, let me take you back to 2020, that black square moment. I think it's a really useful test for this. So many businesses posted those black squares. And so many businesses wrote inclusion statements, possibly that afternoon or that week. Years on, look at who has actually built the relationships because the backbone of this work of inclusion has a lot to do with relationship building. Look at whose marketing still features only people who look like them. The programs still attracting the same demographic. The podcast guest list still tells the same story. And look at whose team photo on their About page still is telling the same story. Nothing much has changed. Inclusion statements, especially in the age of AI, they cost nothing to write. They do not require you to be inconvenienced. They do not require you to close any gap. This is the part of the conversation where I get the most resistance because the online coaching industry has trained us to believe that anything outside our scope of paid work is a violation of self. To give freely is to be exploited. To make ourselves available is to invite, another dirty word here, burnout. To inconvenience ourselves is to fail at boundaries. And so we've taken that boundaries conversation and we've pushed it all the way to the other side to where we are unavailable. And what if some of those boundaries are actually walls? What if some of that peace we're protecting is just distance from the people we say we care about? Here in Australia, a gentleman by the name of Stan Grant, he's a Wiradjuri man, journalist, academic, author. His book, Talking to My Country, which was published in 2016. And there's a thread in there that really crystallizes this gap that I'm talking about, this gap that exists. Stan writes about the Adam Goods booing crisis. Now, if you're listening outside of Australia, Adam Goods is or was an Indigenous Australian rules football player, AFL. He's one of the greats. And he used to get booed by crowds when he was playing. And this would happen often. The official line was that the booing had nothing to do with race. Adam Goods himself, Stan Grant, and millions of others knew exactly what it was. And Stan goes on to talk about the difference between agreeing intellectually that racism exists, yes, it does, and the visceral experience of standing in a stadium being booed because of who you are. The gap between the discussion and the lived reality. The gap between knowing about a thing and being on the receiving end of it. He writes about racism as the air Indigenous Australians breathe, the conditions of their life. That is the gap our member was describing, the gap Ruby Hamad identifies in her book. That's the gap I'm seeing in the online coaching industry because closing it, or at the very least, reducing that gap would be inconvenient. It would require one getting outside of their comfort zone. When I think about it practically, closing the gap would mean changing who you have lunch with, examining the equity around whose voices you platform. It may include changing your hiring practices, spending money in places you never have spent before. Closing the gap would mean being uncomfortable in conversations you have always controlled. That is inconvenient. And that's the whole point. So here's what I want to offer you today. Inconvenience is the work. It's called work for a reason. Something is required of you. Something is going to cost you. So when we say inclusion work, it is work. It's going to cost you time, comfort, the story you have been telling about yourself, the illusion that you can hold values from a safe distance and have them count. You cannot. One of the harsh realities I share with my students inside my group program Represented is true inclusion is going to cost you. And so If your inclusion work has not cost you anything, it hasn't started yet. This is me telling you the same thing I have had to tell myself many times. The work begins when it becomes inconvenient. Until then, what we are doing is pretty much just curating an image. Curating an image is not inclusion. We're just doing a really good job of brand management. And here's what I love about the way our members talked about this. They did not frame inconvenience as suffering. They framed it as community, as how their grandmothers lived, as how culture remembered to look after each other before individualism told us our peace was the highest good. The kitchen table, the dinner table, where there was always room for one more. The neighbor who turned up with food. The cousin who got picked up from school. The friend whose baby you fed for a whole day because your friend was in hospital. That is inconvenience. Nobody called that at the time. They called it love, family, and just being a decent human being. I feel like the online coaching industry has in some way lost its value on this. We have spent years teaching each other how to say no, how to protect our energy, how to keep our expertise, make every relationship transactional. And we wonder why so many of us feel hollow at the end of a profitable year, or maybe not even a profitable year. I know what happens when I tell people the work is going to cost them. They freeze, they worry about doing it wrong, and that's a big one, and I've spoken about it so many times on the podcast. They want to wait until they know enough, until they have read enough, until they feel ready. And the truth is, my friend, you will never feel ready because there's just so much ground to cover. Going out of your way for this work does not mean doing it perfectly. The imperfect attempt is exactly what builds you. The conversation you fumbled, the comment you made that landed wrong and forced you to learn and re examine your beliefs. Maybe it made you have to apologize. The relationship you stayed in even after you embarrassed yourself. The book you read that made you so uncomfortable you wanted to throw it across the room. The decision to hire someone whose perspective will challenge yours. That client that you took on whose lived experience will stretch you beyond anything that you've ever been stretched. The supplier you switch to whose business is run by people who look nothing like you. That is the work. The imperfect attempt repeated. You see, sustainable inclusion practice is built on getting it wrong. I know that sounds so counter to what one would think or believe. Learning from it when we get it wrong and showing up again and again. That is what sustainable inclusion is. The people I have found who last in this work are the people who got comfortable being imperfect. They are still here because they made peace with the inconvenience. The people who burn out are the ones who waited until they could do it perfectly. They burn out because perfection is really a moving target when you think about it, and it has no destination. They were performing inclusion instead of practicing it. Performance is exhausting. Practice is sustainable. And here's what's required of you, my friend. Closing the gap between what you believe and what you do. One inconvenient choice at a time. You can start that process today because in actual fact, you are saying yes to a more inclusive leadership practice that will help you reach those who, get this, need you the most. And so, if any of this has given you perspective to something you have been feeling, I want to invite you inside Represented. It's my 10-week racial inclusion program for values-led online business owners who do this work together. We close the gap between what you believe and how you operate. We get inconvenient on purpose because that is where the practice actually lives. The waitlist link is in the show notes. The next cohort is coming, and I would love to walk this path with you.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.